All right, welcome back, online learners. So today we're going to take a look at the first of three plate boundaries, or types of plate boundaries. These are the plate tectonics, the tectonic plate boundaries. There are three of them. Today we're going to look at just one. The one we're going to look at is divergent. Divergent plate boundaries. Helps if I spell it right. Okay, so divergent, this word right here, this word means to be different or to be removed. So that means that it's going to be spreading out. So these are when the plates are ripping apart in some way. So the divergent could also mean to divide. So divergent, divide, or in my hand symbols, it's this, where you have your thumbs pointing away from each other, and you go ting, ting, ting. So it's the dividing. So there are two types of divergent plate boundaries. And it's based on what plate is ripping apart, because if you remember back to the layers of the Earth discussion, you have two types of plates, or two types of crust. You have oceanic crust and you have continental crust. So both of those crusts can be ripped apart, and that's exactly what happens with divergent plate boundaries. It's when the crust is being ripped apart. So we'll start with oceanic crust boundary. Divergent. Oceanic crust divergent boundary. So before let's draw our crust. So here we got, this is a crust. If you remember from your notes, I used brown for crust. So I'm just going to draw these pieces right here for now, okay? Because what happens here in the middle, because this is where it's being ripped apart, so what happens in the middle, we're going to talk about as we go. So you know that this is underwater because it's in the ocean. So you're underwater. And then the next thing you got to think about is what's under here. What layer is underneath the lithosphere? What layer is underneath the lithosphere? In our notes, we colored that yellow, and that would be the asthenosphere. The asthenosphere is what lies underneath. So down here, we can go and color this in. We got our asthenosphere. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to label that asthenosphere. And then here, this little brown, I'm going right on there, lithosphere. So these are our mechanical layers, our lithosphere and our asthenosphere. So thinking back to our asthenosphere, we talked about a word from Unit 5. Well, I shouldn't say Unit 5, but we talked about a word from heat transfer. And remember heat transfer, we had conduction, convection, and radiation. Well, the asthenosphere is mixing. It's moving. So you know that movement means that warm magma or warm rock, because remember it's like silly putty. So the warm rock rises. So we have our warm rock rising. And if the warm rock rises, then that means the cool rock will sink. So in the asthenosphere, we have this current, these convection currents. So these are convection. So we have convection. And these convection currents, as they're traveling, you can see that they're going right up underneath the lithosphere, and that hot rock that's rising, that silly putty that's rising, is hitting the rock. And when it starts to hit the rock, remember the ocean crust is real thin, so it's actually really flexible. So it will start to push up. It'll push up that rock. And just like anything else, like all I can think of is like blisters or zits or whatever. But anything else, when it starts to push up, it's eventually going to split open. And that is the case here. So when it splits open, because you have the asthenosphere that's coming up here, and the currents are coming up. So when it splits open, you have that hot, silly putty rock that wants to come out. So that hot, silly putty rock will split open and it will start leaking. So what's it called when that hot liquid rock leaks out? It's lava. So you have lava on the bottom of the ocean that's coming out. And if you have lava in the middle of the ocean, it will push the two plates apart. It'll push the two plates apart. And, well, it's making new land. That's what it is. It's making new land. I'm going to label lithosphere over here. I forgot to label it. So it's making new land. So this magma will come up and it turns into lava once it comes up. But that lava, as it's spilling out, will eventually cool down and make new rock. So here in the middle, you have new rock being made, and so the plates are being ripped apart. They're being ripped apart, and you have new rock that's made. So here in the middle, you have the new rock being made. That new rock is land. Over time, this makes new land. Not new land, but it makes new lithosphere. It makes new crust under the ocean. So where lava leaks out, so lava leaks out. What do we call it when lava leaks out of the crust? The word for that is a volcano. It makes a volcano underwater. Makes a volcano underwater. And then that volcano will push the floor of the sea, the ocean floor, apart. And I've said before in the past that scientists are not creative. So this sea floor being pushed apart is really just, you got the sea floor, and it is spreading. So this phenomena, this event that's happening, is called seafloor spreading. Seafloor spreading makes new ocean crust, which actually makes the oceans wider. So in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, so between the United States and Europe or Africa, all the way down the ocean, there's this line. And if you looked on a map, if you took the water out of the ocean, which I know we can't do, but if you look down on it from space, you would see this line. And this line, seriously, from space, it looks like a cut that has been stitched up. So this cut that's been stitched up is called a ridge. It makes a ridge. And this ridge looks like stitches. Looks like stitches. So it makes a ridge in the middle of the ocean, and in the very middle of the ridge, that's where the lava is at. So you got the lava down the middle of the ridge. So that's called seafloor spreading. In this unit, you're going to need to know what it makes. So seafloor spreading at the ocean crust divergent plate boundary, it creates ocean basins. And basins are flat open areas. Flat open areas. So as those areas widen up, you get more ocean. You get a bigger and bigger ocean. Okay, so let's go from ocean crust divergent. Oh, I'm going to color in my water. It doesn't make a bubble. There's still water down here. All right, so we're going to go from oceanic crust to the, it's land. I'm going to write it in black. Continental. So continental crust divergent. So instead of water this time, we just have land. So just like before, remember the continent crust is thicker than the ocean crust. So I'm going to make my my continent crust thicker. I'm going to leave it in the middle because you already know that this crust is being ripped apart. And we know that this is a lithosphere. And this is a lithosphere. Again, go back to layers of the Earth. What is underneath the lithosphere? You have this asthenosphere. It's the same layers. You've got your asthenosphere here. And just like with the ocean crust, you have the convection. So you have the warm magma, the warm rock rising, and then the cool rock sinks. But there's a difference. The crust of the land is much thicker, and it's not as flexible. So if you start to try to bend something that's not flexible, so think about a lasagna noodle or any noodle. If you start to bend that noodle, what's the noodle going to do? It's going to break. Well, this crust isn't flexible, so it ends up breaking. And when it breaks, it's not real pretty. It's kind of jagged. So the pieces will fall in, and it will start to make this valley. And this valley has a specific name. It has a specific name, and in this valley, it forms this hole. So it's a valley, but it's being ripped apart. So if it's being ripped apart, I need to put those arrows in. It's being ripped apart, just like before. Rip sounds a lot like rift. And so this is called a rift valley. And inside of this rift valley, you can actually have volcanoes because this is all broken, and just like if you break a bowl of soup, the soup will leak out. So in this case, you have lava that can leak out, and it can make volcanoes. So asthenosphere. The most popular or most famous rift valley is in Africa. On the west coast of Africa, there is a giant scar. I mean, if you look at it from space, it's this huge scar where the land is being ripped apart, and it forms this valley. And in the valley, there are volcanoes. In fact, the tallest mountain in Africa is part of this valley. Mount Kilimanjaro is part of this valley, and it's called a mountain, but it's actually a volcano. So this Rift Valley is the most famous, and if I had to make a bet on a test, you're going to see that. You're going to see the East African Rift Valley. Some of the most beautiful things, like just talking about geology, some of the most beautiful things in all of Africa are in the East African Rift Valley. There are lakes that are all different colors of water because of all the chemicals that are leaking into them from under the surface of the earth, the sulfurs, and they're hot water, and so they're crystal clear, but at the bottom of them have minerals, and they're beautiful. Then you have this giant volcano, Mount Kilimanjaro, that people go and hike up and stuff. And it's an active volcano, so it can erupt at any time, but it's just beautiful. And it's made because the crust is being ripped apart. Like, so the same thing, like on land it makes mountain, it can make like volcanoes, while underwater, this whole ridge, it looks like an underwater mountain chain. So you have an effect, you have what amounts to a whole bunch of volcanoes underwater just leaking lava, making new land. So that is your divergent plate boundaries. Divergent plate boundaries means to divide, to go apart. And when you rip the ocean apart, you get a mid-ocean ridge. We should put that. We should put mid-ocean ridge. You get a mid-ocean ridge. And when you rip the land apart, you get a rift valley. So when you rip things apart, when you rip, you get a ridge, and when you rip, you get a rift. So you get a lot of R's with divergence. Rip, rift, and ridge. All right, so next video, or tomorrow, the next video for y'all to take notes on is going to be convergence. You have divergent, and then we're going to go to convergent, which means to collide.